Yo, what's up YouTube? I just wanted to give you guys a quick update regarding my Portuguese progress. As the title of this video says, I have reached 150 hours of input. For those of you that aren't familiar with how I learn languages, I guess specifically Portuguese, I just use comprehensible input. That essentially just means as long as you can understand the gist of what's going on, you'll be fine. Your brain will just figure things out. You don't need to worry about understanding every single word. You can study grammar and vocabulary alongside this input if you want. But for Portuguese, I don't think that's necessary thanks to my background with Spanish. I guess a quick, to give you guys a little bit of context for that. I've been learning Spanish for over 2,400 hours at this point. I would say I have an advanced level, and thanks to the similarities between Spanish and Portuguese, I was able to just start watching stuff pretty early on in Portuguese, or moving on from learner content to more native or content meant for natives. So how long did it take me to reach 150 hours since my last update? About 4 months, maybe a little bit longer. I have been treating Portuguese much more like a regular hobby compared to how I went about learning Spanish. With Spanish, I was doing 3 hours a day, every day, sometimes more. And with Portuguese, I'm just going about it in a very relaxed way. I'm just watching it whenever, or not really whenever I feel like it, but if I miss a day, I don't sweat about it. You know, it doesn't stress me out. Usually I try and aim for about an hour, hour and a half. I think my daily average is about 0.7 hours, however many minutes that is, probably like roughly 45 or something like that. But I would say for the most part, I have been pretty consistent. If I don't do it every day, it's usually about once every other day. And I guess my consistency has increased, let's say, the past month or so. I've kind of gotten back into the routine of things. I was definitely slacking on Portuguese a little bit because I had this like this renewed passion, let's say, for improving my Spanish as quickly as possible, and so I kind of put Portuguese on the back burner. But now I've kind of touched base a little bit. I realized, or I did like a little bit of check-in or check-in with myself, and I was essentially like, all right, there's no need to stress myself out about improving my Spanish as fast as possible, regardless of if I do like an extra half an hour or an hour a day. You know, the time that I was using for Portuguese, it's gonna take a while to really get to that super advanced level that I want. But I am getting there with Spanish. But anyways, what have I been watching in Portuguese? Well, the only thing I've really been watching is dubbed anime. I mentioned this in my previous progress update that I was able to understand it relatively early on. I think more or less after 30 hours of input, which compared to Spanish I think took me about 600 hours of input to get to the point where I was really comfortable enjoying dubbed anime. I think it became accessible at about like 400 hours or so, but I could feel that it wasn't the most ideal source of input. With Portuguese, I feel like my level of understanding right off the bat was really high. There was definitely things I was still missing, and I would say that continues to be the case. However, I have definitely noticed my comprehension level improve drastically over these past 100 hours. I would say that I mean, as far as dubbed anime goes, I feel like I understand 90% or more of the content, or like of the stuff that I hear in the episodes. There are definitely times where I'm like, huh? What did they just say? But in general, I'd say that never happens. There are like definitely like little nuances that I am probably missing. I would say that the level of comfortability that I have watching dubbed anime in Portuguese is very similar to how I felt, like, I guess I mentioned a few seconds ago, when I first started watching anime after 600 hours in Spanish. It's probably going to continue to be my main source of input. I usually limit however much stuff, so I feel like I benefit a lot more from the visuals with Portuguese than I do with Spanish, because my Spanish is, like I mentioned, already at a higher level. So I try and spend most of my like sit down and like immerse time with Portuguese. And so most of my Spanish input is just like podcasts and stuff like that. So I think for the foreseeable future, I will continue to rely on dubbed anime as my main source of input for Portuguese. I have definitely been incorporating native YouTube videos as well. Because I tend to prefer listening to Spanish podcasts and Spanish videos when I'm like moving around and doing things, I don't really, or because I treat YouTube more as like a podcast. So with Portuguese, I don't watch a ton of YouTube. Maybe like after I do my hour of input, I'll do an extra 15 minutes of YouTube while I wash the dishes or something for Portuguese. But yeah, in general, dubbed anime. The genres, I guess, like, I don't know. I feel like I've just been watching Black Clover for the past God knows how many months. That for those of you that don't know, Black Clover has, I think, like 170 episodes. So I have been watching it for a while, but I think one of the benefits of watching a series that is that long is that you get used to how the different characters talk. You kind of like, yeah, you basically, your ear gets more like used to how they sound, and it in turn becomes a little bit easier for you to understand them. Next, I'll probably going to watch Hunter x Hunter in Portuguese. I believe there's a dub for that. If not, maybe I'll do My Hero Academia, just because I know that they have a ton of episodes as well. But in terms of YouTube, the only content creator that comes to mind is Pinho. I don't know how to pronounce things in Portuguese, but essentially it's Pinho. He's kind of like your like standard self-improvement type YouTube channel. And my YouTube algorithm recommends me a ton of videos like that. It also recommends me like the occasional news thing, not from like your typical news channel, but from like just kind of like almost your Philip DeFranco type. I believe the name of the channel that I usually see pop up in my feed is Gabby Farel. I might be wrong on that, but she kind of just covers like 2 or 3 like big news channels or big news stories. But yeah, like I said, primarily anime. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, so one big thing that I've noticed in the past, I don't know, maybe 20 hours or so, 25 hours, is that I am able to recall like phrases and I guess like longer structures a lot more frequently, or like I guess they're starting to kind of pop it in my head a little bit more. I remember when I made my last update, I could not like say any words in Portuguese, like apart from the ones that are almost direct transfers from Spanish, like meditation, right? In Spanish it's meditación. In Portuguese it's like meditação or something. Like I said, my pronunciation's not good, but there was a pattern to it, right? So like words like that I could recall fairly easy, but definitely like one phrase that's been popping up a lot in my head is like no ten jeito or something like that. Like I think it's something like no hay manera or something like that. Again, I don't know the exact translations, but stuff like that pops up a lot in my head. Just because there's set phrases that I hear a lot in Black Clover. But yeah, the feeling is very similar to how I felt before I started speaking in Spanish. I think it was at about 800 hours of input. I started to have words and phrases pop up a lot more frequently in my head, like almost like they wanted to come out. I would say, like I said, the feeling is similar. It's not quite the same. I definitely feel like I have a lot more input to go before I'm ready to speak. I'm planning on starting to output at 500 hours of input, and I'll probably do some sort of preparation before that. So maybe at about 400 hours of input, I'll start reading, writing a little bit, making sure I can properly pronounce things. But speaking isn't really like a priority for me, so that's why I'm deciding to wait so long. But yeah, definitely it's an exciting feeling. It's I'm feeling more and more confident as I go, or as I learn. I think the biggest challenge for a lot of people learning a language for the first time is that they have no prior experience, or they basically have no, what's the word? This happens a lot, and I forget the English word for things. I guess like preconceptions of what it's going to be, or what learning a language is really going to be like, how long things are going to take, how they're going to feel, what to expect. And I definitely feel very like confident and calm in my own journey with Portuguese. I know that things are going to work out in the end. So like I said, no rush, feeling good about that. Let's see, what else do I have here in my notes? What is still hard? So native speakers speaking to each other, like quick, like normal conversations, that can definitely be tricky at times. Like I mentioned earlier, I still kind of rely more on the visuals to help with increasing my comprehension. They're not necessary. I can understand, learner podcasts just fine. I haven't really tried native podcast yet. That's probably something I'll start to do maybe at about 300 hours or so. Like I mentioned, I tend to prefer listening to podcasts in Spanish just because that's my main priority, but I'll definitely keep experimenting with them. I haven't noticed like any particular accents or anything being more difficult than others at this point. I know I mentioned in my previous update that it felt like my comprehension was all over the place depending on what I was watching. Like some things I felt like I understood them perfectly fine. Other things I had no idea what was going on. And I think that has kind of like balanced out over the past 100 hours. I feel like I generally have a lot more of a consistent level of comprehension. Any frustration or plateaus? I would say no. I'm very comfortable and happy doing what I'm doing now for Portuguese. I think with Spanish at this level, or I guess at about 150 hours, I had just started listening to Spanish podcasts and like I was excited that I could start to understand them. So I felt really good at that hour count as well. We'll see. If there is going to be any sort of like frustrating plateau, it's probably going to be when I start to speak, just because speaking learning to speak well requires so much time and effort. It's definitely, I think for Spanish, the figures, or I got these numbers from Refold. They mentioned in one of their videos a while back that in their experience, once people have a good base of comprehension, that at about 50 hours of speaking practice, they tend to, they start to feel more comfortable. At 100 hours, they tend to feel quite comfortable. And then at 200 hours of speaking practice, it's like no problem at all. But me personally, I don't usually feel like just hopping in a voice chat and practicing my languages online. I feel like I personally have to really be in the mood to do that. I prefer speaking in person, although I don't really get many opportunities to do that. But yeah, I think the frustrating part will be the initial 50 hours, maybe the initial 100 hours of speaking practice when that happens down the line, just because you're basically like just stumbling over your, like every word, like you're doubting yourself a lot. You struggle to recall or actively recall certain things that you feel like you should intuitively know, or that you do intuitively know, but that are just not in that, they haven't converted to active like memory yet. My goal for Portuguese, I think, at least at the moment, is to get it to I would say like a high B2 level. I think eventually I could probably get it to like a pretty good C1 level. But like I said, since it's not my priority, my timeline is going to be a lot more elongated, I guess. Or like basically instead of like doing 500 hours of input in a year and like starting to speak, it's probably going to take me like 2-3 years or something like that. But basically I just want to be able to have comfortable conversations. I feel very comfortable with my Spanish, or my level of like, or how well I speak Spanish at the moment. So if I could get to that level in Portuguese, that'd be more than sufficient for me. Unless I like made some really good friends who are Portuguese speakers, or I spent a significant amount of time in a Portuguese speaking place, then maybe I would, pressure myself to improve a lot more rapidly, reach a higher level. Because I guess going back to Spanish, right? This is something I'll include in one of my Spanish updates in the future, but at least at the moment, I still have a little bit of trouble speaking in group conversations between natives. Like I tend to just end up sitting quietly in the corner, essentially, like on these chat rooms. But on one-on-one conversations, I feel totally fine, totally normal. I can communicate almost as well as I can communicate in English, in terms of like maintaining a conversation, being engaged, coming up with things to say, stuff like that. But in like these group conversations, they're just rapid firing between each other, and it's a little bit intimidating. I feel like that's probably the main thing, is that it's a little bit intimidating. But yeah, I guess going back to Portuguese, I would really like to achieve a similar level of fluency. I think that's about everything that I wanted to mention. Oh, no, actually, I think in my previous update, I mentioned I was doing Crosstalk. I have not done any Crosstalk since then. I kind of just fell into this like slump, I guess, with that, where I didn't really feel like talking very much, and especially like compared to just being able to sit down and watch like 20 minutes to an hour of like anime in Portuguese just whenever I felt like it. With Crosstalk, I had to have coordinated times, like schedule things ahead of time, and just put a lot more active effort into my immersion. Like I said, mentioned earlier, for me, I don't really like just talking online. And if I do, I really have to be in the mood to kind of motivate myself to do it. But that's something I'm working on this year. I want to be a lot more consistent with my Spanish output, and eventually with my Portuguese output, and just kind of developing that habit is going to be, or is one of my main goals this year. Even if it's only like twice a week, anything is going to be better than nothing. I have not started reading in Portuguese. I know some of you that didn't watch my last update are probably going to ask that. I do not plan on reading until about 400 hours or so, maybe a little bit later. It's not a priority. There are, I guess, when I read like the YouTube titles and stuff like that, or the occasional meme in Portuguese, I don't really have any trouble understanding it unless it's something like super obscure or some more advanced vocabulary. But stuff like that, like, I can usually understand just fine. It often resembles very closely the Spanish equivalents, right? So like a YouTube title in Portuguese, the spelling and like the vocabulary choice is going to be very similar to what that title might have been in Spanish. So that helps a lot as well. But let's see what else. I think that's everything. If you guys have any more questions for me, feel free to drop them in the comments below. This was, I know it said it was going to be a quick update. It ended up being a little bit longer than that. I am looking at my counter right now, and we're already at like 20 minutes for the video. So yeah, if you guys have any more questions, please just leave them below. I'll answer as many as I can, which should be all of them. It's not like I've got a ton of people commenting or whatever, but yeah, the next update I will be making will be at 300 hours of input. So sometime this year, hopefully. I can't give like a definitive timeline. I was averaging about 20 hours of input a month for Portuguese. I'm trying to get that up to at least 30. So, you know, hopefully sometime by the fall or something like that. But with that being said, I really appreciate you guys tuning in for this update. If you're interested in my Spanish progress updates, my Portuguese updates, or any other type of like language learning content that I might be uploading in the future, feel free to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell if you want notifications for that. But yeah, once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.